Imagine you find a mountain. Not a normal mountain. This one's made of silver. Actual silver, all the way through. So much silver that you could dig at it for 200 years and not run out. And let's say you own it completely. Nobody else can touch it. Question, how long until you're the richest country in the world? Because that happened. In 1545, Spain found that mountain. And for the next 100 years, more silver came out of it than Europe had ever seen in its entire history. Spain went bankrupt, not once, 4 separate times while the silver was still arriving. By the end, one of the poorest countries in Western Europe was the one sitting on the biggest pile of money in human history. Meanwhile, the Dutch, who had no silver, no empire, and a country that was mostly swamp, ended up running global finance. So what actually happened? Because they spent it badly is the answer everyone gives. And it's wrong. Or at least, it's about 10% of the answer. The real reason is something nobody at the time could see. And once you understand it, you'll notice governments still doing the exact same thing today. Let's start with the mountain. The mountain's real name is Cerro Rico, Rich Hill. It sits in what's now Bolivia, about 4 kilometers above sea level, which is high enough that walking upstairs makes you feel like you're dying. In 1545, the Spanish found out it was essentially solid silver ore, not veins. The whole thing. They built a city at the base called Potosí. Within about 40 years, Potosí had a population of 150,000 people. That made it bigger than London, bigger than Paris. A city in the Andes, 4 kilometers up where nothing grows, was one of the largest cities on Earth. Every single thing in it, food, wood, clothing, had to be hauled up by a llama. Why bother? Because the silver was worth it. Spain took 1/5 of everything mined, straight off the top, the royal 5th. And I do need to say this plainly, because it's not a detail you skip. The mining was done by forced labor. The Spanish revived an Inca system called the mita, which conscripted indigenous men from across the region to work the mine. Conditions were lethal. Mercury was used to process the ore, and mercury poisoning kills you slowly and horribly. Estimates of the death toll over the mine's working life run into the hundreds of thousands. The wealth wasn't found. It was extracted from people who never saw any of it. Anyway, the silver goes onto ships. Twice a year, a fleet crosses to Seville. And when it arrives, the Spanish crown is suddenly spectacularly rich. So they do what you do. They spend it. Spain in the 1500s is fighting basically everyone. The Ottomans in the Mediterranean. The French. A very long war in the Netherlands that lasts 80 years, which is less a war than a lifestyle. Wars are expensive. Armies need paying every single month. And if you don't pay them, they stop being an army and start being an angry mob with weapons. Here's where it gets interesting. The silver arrives twice a year. The bills arrive constantly. So Spain borrows against silver that hasn't turned up yet. They borrow from bankers in Genoa and Augsburg. The Fuggers, if you want a name. At genuinely eye-watering interest rates. And each time the fleet lands, most of that silver doesn't even get unloaded properly. It's already promised. It goes straight through Seville and out to the lenders, which means Spain has enormous income and no money. Those aren't the same thing. By 1557, 12 years after the mountain is found, Philip II can't make the payments. Spain declares bankruptcy. Now, bankruptcy for a king isn't like bankruptcy for you. Nobody repossesses his castle. It means he tells his lenders they're getting paid later, at worst terms, and there's nothing they can do because he's a king, and they're not. And the lenders keep lending anyway, because he's still got the mountain. So that's the 10% everyone knows. Overspending, endless wars, bad borrowing. But here's the thing. Even if Spain had spent perfectly, no wars, no loans, careful budgeting, the silver still would have failed them. Because of something happening underneath that nobody in Europe had the vocabulary to describe. Let's do the simplest possible version of this. Say a village has 10 loaves of bread and 10 coins. A loaf costs 1 coin. Everyone's clear on this. It's just how much bread costs. Now somebody finds a silver mountain and drops 90 more coins into the village. There are now 100 coins and still 10 loaves of bread. Nobody baked anything. The bakers didn't get faster. There's exactly as much bread as before. So what's a loaf worth now? 10 coins. Because the bread didn't change. The coins did. Each one now means 1/10 of what it used to. And here's the part that matters. Nobody chose that. No baker sat down and decided to raise prices tenfold. It just happened, distributed across thousands of people making individual decisions over decades. That's inflation, and we're so used to the word that we've stopped hearing what it actually means. It isn't things get expensive. It's money losing meaning. The number on the coin stays the same. What it can do quietly shrinks. Across the 1500s, prices in Spain rose roughly 3 to 4 times over. Historians call it the price revolution. By modern standards, that's mild, barely over 1% a year. But nobody had ever seen sustained price rises before. For most of European history, prices had just sat there. For generations, people noticed. They had no idea why. A Spanish priest called Martín de Azpilicueta worked out the actual mechanism in 1556 that money flooding in makes money worth less. He was right, and almost nobody acted on it because it's a deeply counterintuitive idea. More money makes us poorer? That sounds insane. It sounds like a trick. But now think about what this does to Spain specifically. Spanish prices are rising fastest because the silver lands there first, which means Spanish goods become expensive compared to everyone else's. So if you're a Spaniard buying cloth, you don't buy Spanish cloth. It's pricey now. You buy Dutch cloth or English cloth because those countries haven't been flooded yet. The silver arrives in Seville and immediately leaves to pay for imports, to pay lenders. Spanish manufacturing can't compete against its own currency, so it withers. Why build a workshop when you can buy the finished thing cheaper from abroad? Spain ends up as a pipe. Silver comes in one end from Potosí, goes out the other into the rest of Europe, and Spain gets to be briefly wealthy while it passes through. But it doesn't build anything durable because the money never stays still long enough to become a factory or a fleet or a bank. Meanwhile, the Dutch. The Dutch have no silver mountain, no empire at this point. Their country is largely below sea level, and they're in the middle of that 80-year war against Spain. What they have is Spanish silver arriving to buy their goods. And instead of spending it on armies, they build the boring stuff. Shipping, warehouses, a stock exchange in Amsterdam, a bank that people actually trust. By the mid-1600s, Amsterdam is the financial center of Europe, and Spain is on bankruptcy number, let's not count. The country with the money lost. The country the money passed through won. Because it turns out, wealth isn't the pile. It's what the pile lets you build. And Spain never built, because they never needed to. Why develop an economy when there's a mountain? That's the resource curse, and it has a name now because it kept happening. Countries that strike oil or diamonds or gas and find themselves poorer a generation later, same mechanism. The money floods in, the local currency strengthens, everything else in the economy becomes uncompetitive and quietly dies. Economists call it Dutch disease, which is a wonderful irony given who we just watched win. Cerro Rico is still standing, still mined, on a small scale. It's honeycombed with so many tunnels that the summit is slowly collapsing. The mountain is measurably shorter than it was. The thing I keep coming back to is that nobody involved was stupid. Spanish kings weren't idiots. Their bankers were the most sophisticated financiers alive. They simply didn't have the concept. The idea that money could lose meaning by getting more plentiful hadn't been invented yet, so they couldn't see it happening even while it was destroying them. We do have the concept now. It's in every textbook. Every central bank has an entire department for it, which raises a slightly uncomfortable question, one worth sitting with. If the problem was never a shortage of intelligence and only ever a shortage of vocabulary, what are we currently doing that we don't have the words for yet?